Hey folks, it's me, your friendly neighborhood thought criminal. I have been asked to speak a little bit about Brexit, and probably this is a day too late, but here we go anyway, talking about Brexit. That is the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union, which I've been following for quite some time, and I've been has been a lot of interest to me because of the rhetoric that's being used, because of the political actions being used, and just because of some of the historical consequences going from the past and in the present, that I think are of a lot of interest to me. I do not live in the United Kingdom. I live in the United States, so I'm not the best person to ask about any kind of like particular pragmatic issue having to do with the United Kingdom. That's going to be better suited to somebody who lives in Great Britain, and I will link below one video, I think, from Sargon of Akkad, who is an Englishman and probably represents what my perspective I imagine would be had I lived there. And he's very good about being logical and breaking down non-arguments. So you can watch that video below if you choose to. Otherwise, I'll give you my perspective as an outsider and why I find it interesting. First of all, the reason that I think I would be inclined to say like I would not want to be part of the European Union. I'm not a fan of the European Union in general and their sort of anti-democratic processes. I'm not a fan of like large-scale economic regulation, quota systems, and all the kind of stuff that they do economically. So I don't really like the European Union, and I think it'd be better if a country can control its own borders. Even here in the United States, if a state has more control over its state borders, I think that is something legitimate as well. And I'm a big believer in the razor that which governs closest governs best. So that means that you don't want people making laws that apply to you that are thousands of miles away from you and have no idea what's going on in your everyday life, what you need and what you don't need, as far as oversight and any of those sorts of things. And as far as taxation, the further away that tax money goes, the more likely it is to get eaten up by things that you have no idea what is happening with them. Certainly the United States congressional budget is a nightmare to even try to sift through what is going where and what is being spent where. It's much easier to figure that out if it's like, you know, your local city council, your local county government, whatever it's going to be, or even your state government. And I live in the biggest state in the United States, which is California, as far as population goes. And it's a nightmare here, but it's less of a nightmare than it is in Washington, D.C. So those are my general thoughts about it. Now, let me tell you, as an outsider, I've been following this for a lot of time, but I have not heard anything from anyone I know here until after the referendum in the United Kingdom passed. So everyone was basically calling Britain stupid as soon as the referendum passed, right? Everyone was like, Britain is stupid. Like, it was just a bunch of name calling. I hadn't heard anything from them about Brexit before this, but it only happens afterwards. And the reason that I felt like they were saying all these things afterwards, and this is on social media for the most part, but a couple, in-person conversations, is because like a media outlet told them that what happened and told them that they should like be upset about it, right? That it was a dumb decision. And then they just kind of echo that back. They just listen to the echo box and then echo back the thought, thinking that it's their thought. So that's what I saw. And there were two or three arguments that non-arguments. They're really non-arguments that I saw regarding that, so I thought I'd talk about those. The first one is racism. Racism, of course, is thought crime. If you say you're racist, you don't like immigrants, is what it was. Well, if immigrants are so good, here's the consistency part of that. If immigrants are so good, then the rest of Europe should be ecstatic to get to keep them and not send them to Great Britain, right? So there's your consistency. If the rest of Europe is upset that Great Britain is not going to be taking more of these Middle Eastern immigrants, then you know that they're lying when they say that they're a benefit, and that they are that the people themselves saying that do not actually view them as a benefit. So there is a bit of consistency right there. That's the big one, is racism. Like, everyone in Britain is suddenly a racist. This is a country that ended slavery voluntarily, right? And in the United States, we had this bloody civil war that involved slavery to try to like get rid of this awful institution. And the Britons were just like, it's really bad that we're doing this. Let's not do it anymore. And that's great. So keep in mind that's that country. Here's another interesting thing about some of those arguments. The other one was the other big one was their currency will become worthless, right? Not understanding. I mean, if you this is universally from people that I have to believe have never cracked an economics textbook, because what happened is like, oh, the currency's already down 10%. It's like, okay, so speculative currency trading markets are what you're going to use to determine the value of a currency overall in an economic activity in a very large and diverse economy that is Great Britain. That's really stupid, frankly. The value of money is determined much more by the quantity of money than by outside demand for that currency. The outside demand has to do with trade balances, and trade balances they will work themselves out. You don't really need to worry about trade deficits either, because if somebody's trading you goods for paper and then not spending the paper, you've gotten the better end of that deal. But generally, if somebody is, buying pounds, you can only spend pounds inside of Great Britain. So that money is just going to come back in investment or some other form. So you really don't need to worry about like the outside trading values. That's going to affect your import exports a little bit, but I don't think it will be enough to affect anything. And the third one was, that actually, I guess there's 4 or 5, but the third one was, imports. But suffice to say, unless they start printing pound sterling like crazy, the overall value of the money is not going to go down, because you're not inflating the money supply. You're not going to experience inflation. That's what I'm getting at. People think that like the international currency speculators is somehow a value of what inflation will be. They're like this, they're going to be having wheelbarrows full of pound sterling to go buy loaves of bread. It's like, no, that's not going to happen, because this isn't the Weimar Republic, right? This isn't like this isn't like a Depression era banana republic we're talking about here. This is Great Britain, and their money system could be more sound, but it's actually, I think it probably has better future than the euro. I could probably do another video on that. I'm not an economist. I'm an armchair economist. My dad was an economist. I read a lot of economics books. So don't take my word on that. Do your own thinking, obviously. So another argument was that they won't be able to trade with Europe. It's like, does any country not have a trade agreement with Europe? Like Japan has a trade agreement. Every country has trade agreements with other countries. It's not that hard to just do that, right? There's full-time bureaucrats who work that stuff out for you, okay? There's full-time bureaucrats. That's what you pay politicians to do in an ideal world. But, they're like, we're not going to trade. It's like, trade is beneficial to both parties. Trade's going to continue. That's going to happen. If Europe doesn't want to trade with Great Britain, that's on them. It's not on Great Britain. Great Britain can trade with the rest of the world that can have a use for their goods, and it's only going to end up hurting Europe. So there's basically that, and then there's like, oh well, you won't be able to travel freely in the world. It's like that's true. That's a pragmatic argument. You're not going to be able to just travel willy-nilly through Europe. You'll have to get visas and that kind of stuff, which is what the rest of the world has to do anyway. And you'd be giving that up for all the other things that you feel like you're getting with the Brexit. Sovereignty, control over your borders, control over your own economy to a great extent. And so I would be convinced more to be on the Brexit side. That's my opinion. But if you live in the United Kingdom and you have a different perspective, I'm always happy to hear that too, because I think there's a lot of pragmatics there that could be thought about. I'm going to talk a little bit about history, why I find this interesting as well. I find it really interesting, and now that I've left some of the bad arguments that I've just seen from Facebook. Like I said, these are echo chamber arguments. Let me talk about the history that I find interesting here. Is that the European Union is a political union. People have said it's an economic union. I'm telling you, you cannot have an economic union without a political union. The vast majority of all laws in the United States and elsewhere have to do with economic interchange. They don't have to do with criminal law, right? So criminal law is something that doesn't, it changes, but it doesn't change nearly as much as economic law. Most of the laws in the books you're going to see have to do with economic things you're doing, how you're doing business, what regulations are required when you're making a product, all that kind of stuff. There's just mountains and mountains of it. How you do business, how you run your if you have like a mining business, there's all kinds of regulations for that. That's all economic law. That's not it's not criminal law, right? That's all economic law. So the vast majority of it is economic law. So if you have an economic union and you have this group of people who are deciding economic law, then you have a political union. So the European Union is a political union. It was sold as an economic union. Everyone was going to have this common currency, and that was going to facilitate greater trade. Now, what is interesting about the common currency sort of argument is that we have now entered a time where the need for common currency is virtually irrelevant. If you have a credit card, all of those sorts of exchanges can be automated by the banking system at a floating exchange rate, on a daily, hourly basis if you need to. On a minute-by-minute basis, that can be entirely automated, and you can look it up on your smartphone. We have the technology now that no one should have to worry about, like, oh my gosh, what if I have to use lira when I go from Germany into Italy? It's like, you'll use your credit card and your bank will do the work for you, right? That system would be very easy to do, and it wouldn't be that hard to manage. You just let the exchange rates float and everything will take care of itself beautifully. So we don't really need a common currency, but the common currency is a big thing what sold it. But part of that common currency came in all these other things, that involved regulations for how you make products, regulations for what is imported. There's all kinds of import quotas in the EU, and what you can export, and where the tariffs are, and where the money's going. And it's all overseen by like a group of people that are more or less not democratically elected in the way that more normally people think about it, or not elected via like Republican means. So they're not elected directly, and that's a lot of people are upset about that. That's a big part of Brexit, I think, is that they don't know who's really representing them or what's being done. It's all kind of like a kind of shadowy government, but it is a political union. And I find it very interesting that one of the member states of a political union that has law, that has a central government, and I've even heard about them wanting to start an EU military. Central banking is part of the EU, right? And they're wanting to have a treasury in addition to that central bank. Not that you really need a treasury if you have a central bank. See the Federal Reserve. Our treasury can be in the negative by a lot, and you can still just print money and spend it. That's the beauty of the Federal Reserve. Beauty. In the same way that, like, the gaping maw of Cthulhu is beauty. That's the Federal Reserve, in my opinion. So that's it's a political union, but we're going to have a member state that's going to leave the political union, hopefully peacefully, and that is what is very interesting to me, because there's not a lot of historical precedent for member states leaving a political union voluntarily before that political union utterly collapses in on itself. When the USSR collapsed and all the member states basically became their own countries again, that was because the Soviet political structure collapsed. That wasn't because that wasn't because Georgia was like, all right, Soviet Union, see ya. It was like all of that collapsed, and then you had to pick up the pieces from there. So you have a member state that's going to leave voluntarily, which I find very interesting. And you did it by popular vote, which would never happen here in the United States. We have some popular vote stuff at the state level, but even when we have popular vote stuff at the state level, the state legislatures and courts will just kick it out half the time. A lot of people don't remember that California banned gay marriage by popular vote some years ago. And later on, everyone was just like, nah, throw that out. We're just throwing out that gay marriage ban because we don't like it, right? And if they probably had another popular vote, they would have gotten rid of the gay marriage ban. But because time changes minds as well as anything else. But it is one of those things that, like, when we do have popular vote stuff here in California, we can only do it on like a state by state level. A lot of times then nothing happens, and that could still happen in the EU. Like there's nothing to say this referendum will be followed, but I think it might be, and the reason is because of like a civic. I don't know how to put it. There's a different. David Cameron resigned, and so there's a different sort of civic duty relationship of the European politicians, not the European, the British politicians. Because if a popular vote that Barack Obama was against passed that was significant, like we're going to let Texas leave the Union. He would not resign because he was on the wrong side of that, thinking that he could no longer represent his country. You would not have a governor of California resign if California chose to secede from the United States. That wouldn't happen. Like, politicians don't resign here, and they certainly don't resign when the popular will goes against them. Like, that does not happen here in the United States. We have resignations when it's like an impending conviction for a felony happens, like with Nixon. And then you have an impending conviction of a felony, and you still don't have resignations with some people. It's insane how much like politicians hold on to that power here. But there you have David Cameron, who says, I can't represent the will of the people following this referendum because I believe in something different. So I should resign, and someone else who agrees with this should become prime minister. And that, wow, that to me has a lot of class with it, right? And a lot of respect for your fellow countrymen. That was of great interest to me. Also of interest to me, like I said, you may peacefully leave it. Here in the United States, our Civil War was states. We have individual states tried to leave the Union and say we no longer want to be part of the United States, and the federal government of the United States said, we're not recognizing that, and we will not give you any of the land that we, the federal government, own. And then the Civil War happened, basically. So I think if I were to equate this is like if Britain were leaving not in 1789, if Britain were like a United States state. They're not leaving in 1789, they're leaving in like 1785. Like a couple years before the European Union becomes a really solid political union, and member states are really controlled by the central government. So the proper time for all the South to leave the United States was not in 1860. It was in 1789 when it should have been clear to the Constitutional Convention that half the country really didn't like slavery. And I do not take that as an endorsement of slavery. Slavery is a very, very bad institution, and I don't think anyone would argue for it. But if those states were going to secede, the time to do it would obviously be before you have a solid like political union and central government established. Although I do think the European Union has a central government now, it's just not. They don't have the army to like go invade Great Britain and enforce their political will on this sort of errant rebellious province over there. So it's a really critical time. If Britain does not leave the European Union now, then they will not leave it because it's the nature of these sorts of things to grow in power and grow in scope and centralize power. You've seen it over and over again. And if we look at the United States, you went from a confederation that basically only existed to pool like military resources to a union where the federal government was still very small and existed mostly to exercise military things and to establish like common trade agreements between all of the states, much like what the European Union tries to do. And then by the time you get to the Civil War and you have a refusal of the federal government, you have a refusal of Washington to turn over any of the land that they say they possess, which is in Southern Territory, which has claimed that it is no longer part of the Union. At that point, and then they go and conquer those errant states. At that point, I believe, and you guys are welcome to disagree with me with this, at that point, you've transitioned away from like a union of separate political entities into what is probably better described as a Republican empire. You have a central government that enforces its will on the other states, and they do not have the option to leave. And that's the big thing, is that in any voluntary arrangement, anyone can walk away at any time, and that is not the case when it comes to the states' relationships with the federal government. Political military force has been used to maintain that union, and I do think lots of people are afraid of the EU becoming the United European States, and frankly, I think that fear is valid, because when the United States started, people did not think that we were going to be the United States. Every state was like its own. Every colony became like its own little country, and there was a federation to kind of pool military resources, and then it basically evolved more or less over a couple of decades into what became the United States. And now we're not, now we are more imperial than probably we've ever been. There's a lot more force that's being used outside the country than ever in history past. But anyway, that's what I think about it as an outsider. I know that this video is probably a little over long in those sorts of terms, but thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for listening. That's my general opinion on it. I find it very interesting as a student of rhetoric, and as a person who likes to observe history and think about history, and just as a person who is interested in what's going on in the world. That's my perspective on Brexit. So hopefully you found this interesting. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And my book is out. If you want to give my book a read and support the channel, the link will be down below. It is called Muramasa Blood Drinker. It's a nice little samurai novel with lots of blood. Have a great one. I appreciate it.